I never thought my life could unravel so fast. My name's Daniel, 38 years old, a structural engineer with steady hands and a steady heart. I built things, bridges, homes, a marriage. 20 years with Sarah, my high school sweetheart, and I thought we were unbreakable. Solid. Like the steel beams I calculated to hold up the world. But that day, it all came crashing down. It was a Tuesday, gray and ordinary. I came home early, toolbox clanking in my truck, thinking I'd surprise her with takeout from that little Italian place she loved. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, too quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and makes your stomach twist. Sarah. I called, my voice echoing off the walls. No answer. Then I heard it, a laugh, her laugh, light and free, drifting from upstairs. My heart lifted for a moment, until I heard him. A boy's voice. Not a man's, no, high-pitched, awkward, stumbling over words. I froze, 1 foot on the stairs, my hand gripping the railing so tight the wood creaked. What was a kid doing in my house? I climbed, step by step, each one heavier than the last, dread pooling in my chest like wet cement. The bedroom door was cracked open, just an inch, but it was enough. Through that sliver, I saw them. Sarah, my Sarah, sitting on our bed, her auburn hair spilling over her shoulders, and a lanky teenage boy in a school blazer, perched beside her, his face flushed and grinning. I didn't burst in. I couldn't. My legs turned to stone, my breath caught in my throat. They didn't see me, didn't hear me, they were too wrapped up in whatever this was. She was leaning close, whispering something, and he laughed again, nervous but giddy. A schoolboy. A kid who couldn't even drive yet. My wife, my partner, my everything, was sitting there with him, her hand brushing his arm, her eyes sparkling like they used to for me. I backed away, silent, my mind screaming. Downstairs, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the takeout bag I'd dropped, the scent of garlic knots mocking me. I waited. I don't know why, maybe I needed proof, maybe I needed to see how far she'd take it. An hour later, she came down alone, humming, her cheeks pink. "Oh, Daniel, you're home early," she said, casual as anything, like she hadn't just torn my world apart. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice low, trembling. She didn't even blink. "Just a student I'm tutoring. He's struggling with math." Sweet kid, really. A smile, too bright, too easy. You'd like him. A lie. A flimsy, pathetic lie. I knew her tells, the way her left eyebrow twitched, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. She wasn't tutoring him. And worse, she didn't even try to hide it. She thought I'd swallow it whole, nod, and carry on. That's when I realized. She didn't just betray me. She underestimated me. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't, not yet. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth, my thoughts a tangled mess of rage and disbelief. Sarah sat across from me at the dinner table, twirling pasta around her fork, chatting about her day like nothing had happened. "The PTA meeting dragged on forever," she said, laughing softly. "You know how Mrs. Carter gets about the bake sale." I nodded, forcing a smile, my knuckles white around my glass of water. Every word she spoke was a brick, building a wall between us, or maybe burying me alive. That boy's face kept flashing in my mind. Freckled, gangly, probably 16 at most. A schoolboy. What did she see in him? Was it his youth? His innocence? Or was it me? Had I become too steady, too predictable, a man who fixed leaking pipes and paid bills on time? I wanted to scream, to shake her and demand answers, but I didn't. I stayed silent, watching her, studying her like a blueprint for a structure I no longer understood. The next morning, I called in sick, something I never did. "You okay, Dan?" my boss asked, his voice crackling through the phone. "Yeah, just need a day," I muttered, hanging up before he could pry. I waited until Sarah left for work. She taught English at the high school, of all places. Then I started digging. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to know. Her laptop was on the kitchen counter, still logged in. My hand shook as I opened her email, scrolling through the mundane. Lesson plans, grocery lists, a reminder about the car's oil change. Then I saw it, a message from Jasper K., sent 3 days ago. "Can't wait to see you again, Mrs. H. You make trig bearable." Jasper. The kid had a name. My stomach lurched. I clicked through more, dozens of emails, going back months. They started innocent enough. Homework questions, thank yous for extra help. But then they shifted. "You're different from everyone else," he wrote in one. "I feel like I can tell you anything," in another. Her replies were careful, teacherly, at first. Then, "You're special, Jasper." Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. My vision blurred. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. I went upstairs, rifled through her dresser, nothing. Her nightstand, nothing but novels and a half-empty tube of hand cream. Then, under the bed, I found it, a small wooden box, carved with flowers, one I'd never seen before. Inside was a bracelet, cheap, braided leather, the kind a kid might make at summer camp. A note was tucked beneath it, scrawled in messy handwriting. For you, S. Thanks for everything. No signature, but I didn't need one. I sat there, holding that bracelet, feeling the cracks in my chest widen. She'd kept it hidden, a treasure from him, while I'd been out there building our life. And then the doorbell rang. I jolted, shoving the box back under the bed, my heart hammering. Through the window, I saw a delivery truck pulling away, a package left on the porch. I opened it, expecting bills or something for the house. Instead, it was a book, Poems for Young Hearts, addressed to Sarah, with a post-it note inside. Thought you'd like this. Jay. She wasn't just cheating. She was collecting him, piece by piece, right under my nose. I couldn't look at her the same way after that. Sarah came home that evening, her arms full of grading papers, her smile as warm as ever. Hey, hon, how was your day off? She asked, kicking off her shoes. I mumbled something about resting, my voice flat, my eyes fixed on the TV screen I wasn't watching. She didn't notice, or didn't care. She hummed her way into the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I wanted to hurl that bracelet at her, to shove the book of poems in her face and watch her squirm. But I didn't. I put on a mask instead, calm, steady Daniel, the man she thought she knew. Days turned into a week, then 2. I played my part, kissed her goodbye each morning, asked about her classes, nodded at her stories. But every night, I lay awake beside her, listening to her soft breathing, wondering how she could sleep so peacefully with a lie that big coiled in her heart. I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. Furious at her, at that kid, at myself for not seeing it sooner. A man's supposed to protect what's his, right? Build walls strong enough to keep the wolves out? I'd failed, and that gnawed at me worse than the betrayal itself. Then came the curveball. It was a Saturday, drizzly and cold. I was in the garage, tinkering with an old lamp to keep my hands busy, when the phone rang. Sarah was out, running errands, she'd said, so I picked it up. Mr. Harper, a woman's voice asked, sharp and clipped. This is Principal Ellis from Westfield High. We need to speak with you urgently. My gut twisted. Westfield, Sarah's school. Is this about my wife? I asked, gripping the receiver. No, she said, and I could hear the frown in her voice. It's about your son. I nearly dropped the phone. My son. I stammered. I don't have a. She cut me off. Jasper Harper. He's been suspended for fighting, and we need a parent here now. Jasper Harper. Harper, my last name. My knees buckled. I told her I'd be there, hung up, and stood there, the garage spinning around me. Jasper wasn't just some random kid. He was claiming my name, or she was letting him. I drove to the school in a daze, rain streaking the windshield. The principal met me in her office, a stern woman with gray streaks in her hair. Jasper slouched in a chair, his lips swollen, a bruise blooming on his cheek. He looked up at me, and I saw it, fear, yes, but also recognition. He knew me. You're not my dad, he muttered, voice cracking. Where's Sarah? She's not here, I said, my tone ice cold. The principal raised an eyebrow. Mr. Harper, Jasper's listed you and Mrs. Harper as his guardians. Is that incorrect? I stared at him, then her, my mind racing. Guardians? What had Sarah done? There's been a mistake, I said finally, standing. I'll sort this out with my wife. I left him there, let the school deal with him. On the drive home, my hand shook on the wheel. She hadn't just cheated. She'd woven this kid into our lives, tied him to us with a lie I didn't understand. Was she planning to leave me? To play house with him? Or was this some twisted game? Whatever it was, one thing crystallized in my gut. I wasn't the fool she thought I was. Not anymore. I didn't tell Sarah about the school that day. I couldn't, not until I had more pieces of this jagged puzzle. When she got home, arms full of grocery bags and a smile plastered on her face, I just watched her, silent. You're quiet tonight, she said, unpacking apples into a bowl. Everything okay? I nodded, forcing my lips into a thin curve. Just tired, I lied. She shrugged and carried on, oblivious, or pretending to be. That was her strength, I realized. She could live 2 lives and never flinch. That night, I waited until she was asleep, her breath slow and even. before I slipped out of bed. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to find them in her lies. Back to her laptop this time, I dug deeper. I checked her cloud storage, her deleted emails, anything I could access with the password she'd never bothered to change, Daniel 1985. Irony stung me as I typed it. There, buried in a folder labeled Old Stuff, I found photos. Dozens of them. Sarah and Jasper, at a park, at a coffee shop, even one outside our house, his arm slung around her shoulders. She was beaming in every shot, happier than I'd seen her in years. My chest ached, but I kept going. Then I found the document. A scanned form, dated 6 months ago, temporary guardianship agreement. My name was on it, Daniel Harper, alongside hers, signed in her looping cursive. Jasper's name was listed as the dependent, with a note, to ensure educational stability. My signature was there too, but I'd never signed it. She'd forged it. Forged me. My hand shook as I printed it out, the printer's hum loud in the silent house. She'd made me his legal guardian without a word. Why? What was she planning? The next morning, I called a friend, Mark, a private investigator I'd known since college. I need you to look into someone, I told him over coffee at a diner, sliding Jasper's name across the table. Discreetly. Mark raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Give me a few days, he said, pocketing the note. I nodded, my jaw tight. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore, I was arming myself. 2 days later, Mark called. Meet me at the pier, he said, his voice low. I drove there, the ocean air sharp against my skin. He handed me a thin folder, his face grim. Jasper Kendrick, he started. 16, junior at Westfield High. Parents died in a car crash 3 years ago, lived with an aunt until she bailed last year. No record of him being adopted or fostered officially. But here's the kicker, Sarah's been sending money to a trust in his name. $5,000 over the past 6 months from your joint account. I stared at the papers, numbers blurring. She's been funding him? I whispered. Mark nodded. Looks like it. And there's more, neighbors saw him at your place when you were at work. A lot. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just cheating, she was building a life with him, using my money, my name. But why the guardianship? Why drag me into it? I drove home, the folder burning a hole in the passenger seat. Sarah was in the living room, reading, when I walked in. Hey, she said, looking up. You're late. I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at her, the woman I'd loved for half my life, now a stranger spinning a web I was trapped in. She tilted her head, a flicker of unease in her eyes. Daniel, tell me about Jasper, I said, my voice steady, deadly calm. Her face went pale, and in that moment, I knew the real storm was just beginning. Sarah's eyes widened, just for a second, before she caught herself. Jasper, she said, her voice light, too light, like she was testing the air. What about him? She set her book down, folding her hands in her lap, calm, composed, everything I wasn't. I stepped closer, the guardianship form crumpled in my fist, and dropped it onto the coffee table between us. Start talking, I said, my voice a low rumble, barely holding back the tide of anger crashing inside me. She glanced at the paper, then back at me, her mask slipping. Daniel, I can explain, she began, but I cut her off. Don't lie to me, Sarah. Not now. I've seen the emails, the photos, the money you've been sending him. My money. And this, I jabbed a finger at the form. You forged my name. Made me his guardian. What are you doing? My voice cracked on that last word, betrayal bleeding through. She stood, hands raised like she could pacify me. It's not what you think, she said, stepping toward me. I backed away. She didn't get to touch me, not now. Then what is it? I demanded. Because it looks like you're having an affair with a kid, Sarah. A kid who's calling himself a Harper. Her face crumpled, tears welling up, and for a moment, I almost softened. Almost. Then she spoke. He's my nephew, she whispered, her voice breaking. I froze. Nephew? What? I said, the word sharp, disbelieving. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. My sister's son, she continued, muffled. After the crash, when Linda and Tom died, I promised I'd look after him. His aunt couldn't handle him, so I stepped in. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Your nephew, I repeated, flat. And you didn't tell me? For 3 years. She looked up, tears streaming. I wanted to protect you, Daniel. You were so busy with work, and I didn't want to burden you. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made her flinch. Burden me? You forged my signature. You let him into our house, our lives, and didn't say a word. He needed someone, she pleaded. He was lost, failing school. I had to help him. The money, the guardianship, it was to get him tutoring, a stable address for college applications. I didn't know how to tell you. I shook my head, pacing now, my hands clenched. And the bracelet? The poems? The way he looks at you. She hesitated, too long. He's just grateful, she said weakly. He's young, impressionable. Stop, I snapped. You expect me to believe this? That it's all innocent? She stood again, reaching for me. I swear, Daniel, it's not what you think. I love you. I'd never. But I was done listening. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me, her voice echoing in my ears. I drove aimlessly, the rain hammering the truck, my thoughts a whirlwind. Nephew. Could it be true? Sarah's sister had died years ago. I'd been at the funeral, seen the grief carve lines into her face. But a nephew she'd hidden? It didn't add up. The closeness, the secrecy, it felt wrong, twisted. I pulled over, hands trembling, and called Mark. Dig deeper, I told him. Family records, anything on Jasper's parents. I need the truth. An hour later, he texted, found something. Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m., same spot. I sat there, rain drumming on the roof, and felt a cold certainty settle in my bones. Sarah's story was a threadbare lie, and I was going to rip it apart. The night stretched on endlessly after I hung up with Mark. I didn't go home. Couldn't face Sarah, couldn't sleep in that bed knowing what I'd found, what I still didn't understand. I drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and stained carpets, and checked in with cash. The room smelled of mildew and regret, but it was better than the suffocating air of my own house. I sat on the sagging mattress, the guardianship form crumpled in my lap, and stared at it until the words blurred. Nephew. Forgery. Lies. My mind spun, a storm of questions with no answers, yet. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, Sarah's tears, her trembling hands, the way she'd pleaded with me to believe her. Part of me wanted to, a small, weak part that still loved her, that clung to 20 years of memories. We'd built a life together. Quiet mornings with coffee, vacations to the coast, the way she'd tease me about my terrible singing. Could that woman, the one I'd vowed to stand by forever, really hide a nephew for 3 years? Could she forge my name, drain our account, and call it family duty? No, it didn't fit. The pieces were there, but the puzzle was wrong. I thought about Jasper too, the boy with the bruised cheek and sullen eyes, muttering, "You're not my dad," like it was a challenge. He didn't look like Sarah, didn't carry her sharp cheekbones or warm hazel eyes. If he was her nephew, where was the resemblance? Where was the proof? And why the secrecy, the bracelet, the poems? My gut churned. Gratitude didn't explain the way he'd grinned at her through that cracked bedroom door, the way she'd leaned close, unguarded, alive. I'd seen love before. I'd given it to her for decades. That wasn't family. That was something else. By dawn, I was hollowed out, running on coffee from a vending machine and a fire I didn't know I had left. I showered in the motel's lukewarm trickle, pulled on yesterday's clothes, and drove to the pier to meet Mark. The air was crisp, the sky a bruised purple, waves crashing against the pilings like they were angry too. Mark was already there, leaning against his beat-up sedan, a manila envelope in hand. "You look like garbage," he said, handing me the envelope. "Feel like it too," I replied, my voice hoarse. "What did you find?" He lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke into the wind. Jasper Kendrick's parents, Linda and Tom Kendrick, died in a crash, like Sarah said. 3 years ago, interstate pileup. Linda was Sarah's sister, confirmed by birth records. Jasper was 13, sent to live with an aunt, Clara Kendrick, Tom's sister. Clara bailed last year, moved to Florida, left the kid with no forwarding address. That much checks out. I nodded, my jaw tight. So far, her story held. But, I pressed, sensing the weight in his pause. Mark flicked ash onto the ground. But there's a problem. Linda and Tom couldn't have kids. Medical records. Linda had a hysterectomy after ovarian cancer, 10 years before the crash. No adoption papers, no surrogacy, nothing legal tying Jasper to them. He's not their son, Dan. He's not Sarah's nephew. My heart stopped, then thudded hard against my ribs. Then who is he? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark handed me a photo from the envelope, a grainy shot of a younger Jasper, maybe 12, standing with a woman who wasn't Linda. Dark hair, thin frame, a stranger. That's his real mother, Mark said. Elena Torres. Single mom, worked odd jobs, died of an overdose when Jasper was 10. No father listed. He bounced around foster homes until he landed with the Kendricks, unofficially. Neighbors say Linda took him in, treated him like her own, but there's no paperwork. When they died, Clara didn't want him, and that's where Sarah comes in. I stared at the photo, my hands trembling. So he's not family. She lied. Mark nodded. She's been playing guardian angel, money, clothes, even got him into Westfield High with your address. But here's the kicker. Elena Torres wasn't just some random woman. She worked at Sarah's school years ago, custodial staff. Sarah knew her, Dan. Knew Jasper before the Kendricks took him. The pier seemed to tilt beneath me. Sarah hadn't just stumbled into this, she'd chosen it. Chosen him. Why? I asked, my voice cracking. Why lie about it? Why forge my name? Mark shrugged, crushing his cigarette under his boot. Could be guilt. Could be control. Could be she's in deeper than she'll admit. But there's more, bank statements. She's been funneling cash to a second account, not just the trust. 15 grand over 2 years, hidden in small transfers. And last month, she applied for a passport for Jasper. A passport. The word hit me like a punch. She's planning to leave, I said, the realization sinking in. Mark didn't disagree. Looks that way. Maybe not now, but soon. She's tying up loose ends. Guardianship keeps him close. Your name keeps it legal. She's smart, Dan. Smarter than you thought. I turned away, staring at the ocean, the waves roaring in my ears. Smart. Yes, she was. She'd played me for years, turned our marriage into a stage for her little drama. Jasper wasn't her nephew, he was her project, her escape, maybe even her obsession. And me? I was the fool holding the curtain. Rage boiled up, hot and sharp, but beneath it, something colder took root. Clarity. She thought I'd stay blind, plodding along while she built her exit. She was wrong. I thanked Mark, shoved the envelope into my jacket, and drove back to the motel. I spread the papers across the bed, photos, records, statements, piecing it together. Sarah hadn't just betrayed me with a schoolboy. She'd crafted a lie so intricate it was almost art. But every structure has a weak point, every bridge a breaking load. I'd find hers. I'd make her feel the weight of what she'd done. That afternoon, I called her. Daniel, she answered, breathless. Where are you? I've been worried. I'm fine. I cut in, my voice steady, a blade wrapped in silk. We need to talk. Tonight. At home. She hesitated. Okay. I'll be there. I hung up, my pulse steady now, my mind clear. She'd spun her web, but I was no longer the fly. I was the spider, and she didn't even know it yet. I waited for her that evening, sitting in the living room, the lights low, the envelope from Mark tucked under my arm. The house felt different now, not ours, not mine, just a hollow shell she'd filled with secrets. When Sarah walked in, her coat damp from the drizzle, she stopped short, sensing the shift in the air. Daniel, she said, her voice tentative, searching. I didn't smile, didn't move. Sit, I said, nodding to the couch. She obeyed, her hands fidgeting, her eyes darting to the envelope. I know everything, I began, my voice steady, each word a stone dropped into still water. Jasper's not your nephew. Elena Torres was his mother, not Linda, not family. You've been lying to me for years. Her mouth opened, then closed, color draining from her face. Daniel, she started, but I held up a hand. Don't. I've got the records, the bank statements, the passport application. You've been planning to run, haven't you? With him. My voice rose, sharp, and she flinched. It's not like that, she whispered, tears welling again. I wanted to help him. He had no one. Stop. I snapped, slamming the envelope onto the table. Papers spilled out. Photos, forms, proof. You forged my name, Sarah. You stole from us. You let him into our home, our life, and you thought I'd just accept it. She shook her head, sobbing now. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He's so lost, Daniel, I felt responsible. Responsible. I laughed, a cold, jagged sound. You don't get to play savior with my life. You made me a stranger in my own marriage. She reached for me, but I stepped back, untouchable. I'm done, I said. You don't get to explain this away. Not this time. Her cries followed me as I grabbed my keys and left, the doors slamming shut on 20 years. I didn't sleep that night either, just drove, the road blurring past, my mind sharpening. She thought tears would fix this, that I'd been like always. She was wrong. I wasn't the soft man she'd counted on anymore. Revenge wasn't just an idea now, it was a promise, growing roots in my chest. But I needed a plan, something precise, something that would hit her where it hurt most. I'd take back what was mine and more. The next morning, I met Mark again, this time at a diner, the clatter of plates a shield against prying ears. She admitted it, I told him, stirring coffee I wouldn't drink. Not all of it, but enough. She's still protecting him. Mark nodded, scribbling in a notebook. Figured. What's your move? I leaned forward, voice low. I want her to lose everything, him, her job, her lies. But I need more. Something to break her. Mark tapped his pen, thinking. I've got a lead. Jasper's been in trouble before, petty theft, truancy, nothing big, but enough to rattle him. And there's a teacher at Westfield, Miss Grayson, nosy type, doesn't like Sarah. Caught her and Jasper together in the library once, thought it was odd. She might talk. I raised an eyebrow. An ally. Mark smirked. If you play it right. That afternoon, I found Ms. Grayson, Ellen, grading papers in her classroom. 50-ish, stern, with a no-nonsense frown. Mr. Harper, she said, peering over her glasses as I introduced myself. What's this about? I took a breath, then laid it out. Sarah's tutoring, the guardianship, Jasper's presence. I left out the affair suspicions, didn't need to say it. Her eyes narrowed. I knew something was off, she muttered. She's too close to that boy. Always has been. You saw them? I asked. She nodded. Last spring, after hours. They were laughing, heads together over some book, not math. I'll tell you that. I reported it to Principal Ellis, but Sarah's got charm. Talked her way out. Ellen leaned forward, voice dropping. I don't trust her, Mr. Harper. If you've got proof, I'll back you. Unexpected, but welcome. A crack in Sarah's armor, and I'd widen it. That night, I called a lawyer friend, Tom, and started divorce proceedings. She forged my signature, I told him. Drained our account. I want her ruined. Tom whistled. That's fraud, Dan. We can bury her with that. I smiled for the first time in days, cold, determined. The plan was forming. Expose her, strip her of Jasper, her career, her pride. She'd feel the weight of her own lies. Over the next week, I moved fast. Tom filed the divorce papers, citing fraud and irreconcilable differences, and froze our joint account. Sarah wouldn't see that coming. I met Ellen again, handing her copies of the guardianship form and bank records. Take this to Ellis, I said. She needs to know. Ellen's eyes gleamed. With pleasure. Meanwhile, Mark tracked Jasper, still at school, still cocky, unaware the ground was shifting. I rented a small apartment, packed my essentials, and left the house for good. Sarah called nonstop, leaving voicemails I didn't answer. Daniel, please, let's talk. Too late. Then came the surprise, a letter from Jasper, slipped under my motel door before I moved. Mr. Harper, it read, I didn't mean to mess things up. She said you'd understand. I'm sorry. Shaky handwriting, a kid's plea, but it didn't soften me. He was part of this, willing or not. Friday, I struck. Ellen delivered the evidence to Principal Ellis, who called an emergency meeting with the school board. Sarah was summoned, no warning, no prep. I wasn't there, but Ellen texted me later. She suspended pending investigation. Broke down in tears. It's done. Good. That was step one. Her job, her reputation crumbling. Step two was Jasper. I tipped off social services about his guardianship. Forged documents wouldn't hold up. They'd move him, far from her reach. I saw her that evening, by chance, outside the school. She looked wrecked, hair tangled, eyes red. Daniel, she called, running toward me. How could you? I faced her, unflinching. You did this, I said. You chose him over me. Now you've got nothing. She sobbed, clutching my sleeve. I loved you. No, I cut in. You loved your lie. I walked away, her cries fading behind me. It hurt, God, it hurt, but I kept going. One more move to make. Revenge isn't sweet. It's cold, satisfying, like steel snapping into place. Social services took Jasper that Monday, relocated him to a foster home 2 counties away. Sarah couldn't stop it. Her forged guardianship collapsed under scrutiny. The school board fired her after a hearing. Fraud and inappropriate conduct sealed her fate. Tom pushed the divorce through, and the judge ruled in my favor. She got nothing but debt and a ruined name. I sold the house, Too Many Ghosts, and bought a cabin upstate, a fresh start. Months later, I heard Sarah moved to a cramped apartment, alone, scraping by on odd jobs. Jasper wrote me once more, a postcard. I didn't know she lied. I'm sorry. I burned it. No room for guilt. One evening, I stood on my porch, the forest quiet around me, and felt it. Peace. Not joy, not yet, but strength. I'd been broken, betrayed, but I'd rebuilt myself, stronger, unyielding. Sarah thought I'd accept her mess, bend to her will. She was wrong. I'd taken everything she valued, her boy, her career, her pride, and left her with the wreckage. A man's character isn't just in enduring pain. It's in rising from it, striking back, and walking away whole.